One of the things I love about New Life is we've all been going through basically the same sermon series, and so I'm caught up with you guys, you're caught up with where I'm at, but we've been looking at, right this summer we spent time talking about what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. And that word disciple we don't use very often. I'm assuming none of you had to figure out which rabbi you were going to disciple or be a disciple of when you were coming up. I didn't, right? We don't use that language anymore. But it's this idea of that we are choosing who we're going to follow, right? Or we're waiting for someone to invite us to follow them. And so in this discipleship, what we grab onto is this concept or this idea, and the word that's used for discipleship kind of means this like student follower. That we do what they do, we talk the way they talk, we act the way they act, we're on their heels. We're not missing anything. If they eat with their left hand, we're going to eat with our left hand, right? If they smile at the lady at Jewel, we smile at the lady at Jewel. You get what I'm saying? And so this idea that we're now disciples of Jesus means we're doing that to Jesus. However Jesus moves and acts, however he lives, however he speaks, whichever hand he eats with, we don't know any of that. But I'm just saying, if we did know, we'd try to figure that out too. How do we live like him? Right? Not just be nicer people than what we were, that go to church a little bit more often than we used to, and try to cuss less than what we grew up with, right? The idea is, how do we actually become like Jesus? Live like him, talk like him, treat people like him, love people like him, give up of ourselves like him. And so we did that for a while, and then we jumped into this next part of all that, where we're talking about what needs to be built into our life so that we are actually like Jesus, right? And so in that, we've been looking at these disciplines or these traits or these different areas, habits maybe, that if they're built into our life, it shapes us and molds us to be more like him. I remember when I got into my freshman year of high school, I'd never played football before, but I always loved football. Like the American kind, not the real kind, I guess, globally. But you know what I'm talking about, right? And so I got into high school, and I remember I thought, because I was this tall going into high school, and so I thought, like, man, I'm a big dude, right? I've got something to offer here. And then I went into the weight room, and I realized these guys actually had habits of working out and lifting that I did not have. And they were actually strong, and I was just tall, I realized, right? And so you start realizing things where if I want to be like them, there's things I've got to start doing. Meaning like daily things I've got to start doing. If I want to, there was a senior in our high school who was a D1 athlete after that was, as a senior, was like bench pressing 450 pounds. So if you know about the world of weightlifting, that was ridiculous for an 18-year-old kid, right? And I remember thinking, like, if I want to be like this guy, he'd spend 2 hours, 5 days a week in the gym. You get it? If we want to be like Jesus, we've got to look at what is he doing and how do I do that? How is he treating people, and how do I treat them that way? And so we've gone through these different things of how do we reorder our life, how do we realign things, how do we point stuff forward, how do we add stuff, how do we subtract things so that we become more and more like Jesus. And this week we're going to nail on one of those. Now, I grew up in a family, maybe this is similar to you too, where finances were extremely tight. I don't remember ever asking my mom for money for anything because I already knew what the answer was, right? And I remember like friends were like, oh, let's go to the movies. I'll just ask my mom for $40. And in my mind, I was like, who's got $40? Like, how do you spend that at a movie? And that was when movies were $5. But you know what I'm saying, right? Like, I don't remember asking for that. And so, maybe this is you, when I turned 15, I got a job and I started making money. Right? And now all of a sudden for me, money was my way of getting all the things that I wanted that I could never have. Right? And so it was shoes, and it was coats, and it was hats, and it was jerseys. I remember having a dumb amount of jerseys, right? Mostly because all I wanted growing up was I wanted what that kid had, and I wanted to look the way that dude did, and dress like this person. And I went to a lot of movies. Why? Mostly because I worked at a movie theater. But, right? Also, because that's what I always wanted to do. Like in junior high, it was like we didn't have go to movie money. And so I had now had benefits where I could go see movies for free. But I also got popcorn. That was the big privilege, right? And so like I could treat myself. I could go out. I could do those things. The hard part, though, is I'm no longer 15, and some of those habits still stick around. right? Where the money comes in and it becomes, well, what do I want to do? What do I want? What have I been waiting for? What do they have that I want that now I can buy because I have this? The reality is, with that kind of thinking and that kind of thought, is whatever I get is mine to do whatever I want, right? And this isn't just about money. It's my money, it's my time, it's my energy, right? My plans. I'm going to do everything that I have control over is mine to do what I want to do with it. Which sounds great until you're married to someone who's all about themselves, right? In our minds, it works great if we get whatever we want. What doesn't work is if you're married to someone who always gets whatever they want, right? You see how that would break down? What about living in a society where you've got 40,000 people around you, and all 40,000 of those people are just trying to do whatever they can to get whatever they want? You get the image? It doesn't work well played out that way, right? And some of us know those people. The hard thing is if you don't know those people, you may be that person, right? Who our entire life is built around, how do I use the stuff that I have to get what I want? Right? Now, that doesn't mean you can't treat yourself every now and then, that kind of thing. But it's, when's the last time generosity flowed out? When's the last time you thought about, how do I use this to benefit anybody else or to bless anybody else? In Scripture, when you open up the Bible, there's this concept, there's this word, there's this action, there's these habits that flow in that become the response to that kind of life. And it's the word stewardship, which again, we don't use very often. Stewardship is the primary job description of the created human. What I mean is, this is the thing we do, right? In Genesis chapter 2, which if you know anything about the Bible, we're only one chapter into the Bible. This is like beginning. This is like the kindergarten Sunday school stuff. This is 1 + 1 = 2. The very first thing we see in Scripture that God tells humans to do, or what he does with them, is in Genesis chapter 2:15. It says this: "Then the Lord God took the man and he put him," or he placed them, right? There's intentionality in the Garden of Eden for two things: to cultivate it and to tend it, right? Here's what I love is you are where you are likely because this is where God's placed you. Because a lot of you have tried to get out and he hasn't let you. Some of you don't know why you're here, right? Some of you have a very strong sense of why you're here. Some of you love your neighborhood. Why? Because God's placed you here, right? And it's frustrating. I've been frustrated when I've got friends that are like, well, I'm going to move to wherever. Why? Because I want to live there. Because then for me, it just is like goes back to that high school Don that's out dropping crazy money on jerseys because that's what I want to do. But what about owning where you're placed? And if God's placed you there, right, the job description then is to cultivate it and to tend it. Now, my guess is many of you are not active farmers. So the language gets lost a little bit, right? And the word cultivate literally means this in the Hebrew that it was given. It means to serve it. To make sure that this place that man was planted, to make sure that the place they're in is served, that it's cared for. To do what needs to happen for the place you're put in so that it thrives and flourishes. If you cultivate a field, it's for the purpose of growing really good crops. Right? If you're placed in a neighborhood, it's for the cultivation. It's so that you serve the place and the people that you're at, so that the people flourish and thrive. But then he also says to tend it. It means things like this: to keep it, to watch it, to preserve it, to guard it, to secure and pay attention for it. Right? It's this idea that in our neighborhoods, God's people are people who know that we've been placed here for a reason, and in our brains we're thinking, my job is to watch out for this place. My job is to keep attention of it, to make sure that it's safe and secure, to make sure that this is a good place, right? We're cultivating it, we're serving it so that it's good, and we're guarding it to make sure it stays good. So you're looking for the good that's happening. You're guarding it to make sure that good keeps happening, right? Because light doesn't run away from darkness. If light runs away from darkness, all you're left with is deeper darkness. Stewardship is what we're called to do. Stewardship takes an honest look at where God has placed you, and it requires you to find the good, the value, and the purpose in that place. Stewardship requires you to evaluate what it will take to ensure the people and places around you thrive and flourish. Stewardship requires you to guard the good purpose and potential of the people and the place around you. If we are good stewards, the crazy neighbor across the street knows that they've got a neighbor across the street that they may also think is crazy, who they know is there for their good. It's ordering your life and resources to serve everyone and everything around you. It's ordering your life and your resources to serve everything around you. So our biblical understanding of stewardship requires an understanding of God's purposes. If you don't know what God's doing, you have no idea how you're supposed to align your stuff for it, right? How many of you know nothing about cars? Like if your car makes a weird sound, you don't know how to fix it, right? So if you don't know how a car works, and you're like, you know what, that weird like, and then like a ding sound, you're like, I'm going to figure it out, right? Here's the deal. You probably shouldn't figure it out, at least not without somebody that knows how a car works. Right? Because you don't know how to align your thinking, your problem-solving skills, any mechanical stuff necessary. You might be putting weird fluids in something. It's like, that doesn't belong there, right? Because we don't know how it's supposed to work. So either we don't do anything and we let it go until it dies, or we take it to somebody and or learn the skills necessary so that once we know how it works, now we can add what we've got to make this thing function. It's the same thing with us and the way God's plan is. If we start to learn how God's working and what he wants to see happen and why he's placed us here and what this looks like when it's set on fire, like in the good way, like when things are going on all cylinders, firing the way it's supposed to, running the way it needs to. If we start understanding that, then we know, well, I need to start ordering my life to make sure that keeps happening. When we understand God's purposes for places and people, it requires that we enter a posture of a servant. I'm here to serve that. Whatever God's doing, I want to make it happen. Whatever God wants to see happen on my block, I want to see it happen. Whatever God's doing in my building, I want to make sure that that's happening more and more. It also requires us that we tend to, right? That same as Genesis 2:15, that we're keeping it, we're watching it, we're guarding it, the people and places that we're placed into. When God's people are poor stewards of the people and places around them, bad things happen. Adam and Eve get kicked out of the garden because they didn't live into God's purposes in the place they were planted. As you go through most of the Old Testament, what you end up finding is God ends up removing power and authority from people and the nation of Israel because they didn't keep the plan that they were supposed to keep well. And so when they don't hold up their end of the job they were given to do, that removes the blessing of what God promised when they lived into his plan. But when God's people are faithful stewards of God's purpose, this crazy cool stuff happens. If you remember the story of Joseph, it shows up at the end of Genesis. Joseph is this guy. If you think your family's crazy, Joseph is like it's like a warm tea in a fireplace. Like it makes you feel better about your whole life scenario. He comes from a big family of a bunch of boys, and they all like hate him because dad loves him more than the rest of them. And so they all like transpire to kill him. Somebody speaks up and says, this is probably not a great idea, right? We're thankful for, big brother Reuben. And so what ends up happening is like, well, we'll just throw him in a pit and sell him off into slavery, right? Anybody grew up in that family? Okay, just checking. So we're at least so you're there, right? What ends up happening, though, is he ends up going into Egypt, into slavery and all this stuff. And because he's a good steward of everything he's got, and he takes care of whatever place he's put in. When he's in jail, he's taking care of the other prisoners and the prison guards. Get it? Because he's a good steward, God keeps elevating him, or the people around him see stuff in him that says there's something different about this guy. And the stewardship of his life and his attitude bring him into a place where he's elevated into the one who's over everything. Daniel stewards his responsibilities. He has a role called a satrap. So he stewards it so well that the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. You get it? This dude who's a foreigner who doesn't belong, who's there because of a hostile takeover of a country, now becomes somebody who the king's considering second in command. Why? Because he's looking at the people around him. He doesn't want to be there. He wants to be back home. But because this is where life's put him, he looks at everything around him and asks the question, how do I make this place better? No, his attitude and the extraordinary spirit he possessed, that's what Scripture tells us, is what set him apart. Because his attitude was different. He looked at the world around him and the people around him, the ones who destroyed a city and took him captive. And he looked around them trying to figure out, how do I make this place a better place? Stewardship confronts our pride and arrogance and our greed and our selfishness. For us to be good stewards, there's no room for any of that. If we're unable to do what we're called to do, we're unable to do what we're called to do until we confront our pride, arrogance, greed, and selfishness. Those are the things that will hold us back from being good stewards. We steward our resources for God's purposes and thriving of people and places around us. We're looking at stuff like how are we ordering and managing our finances or our time or our energy and our strength for our lives, for others' lives, and the places we live in. We're looking at things like this. We steward our relationship for God's purposes. How am I serving and building up and making people's lives around me better? Right? Any of you just got swept off your feet this week with that thought? Or was it like scrolling through some online store trying to figure out, how am I going to use, I got a little extra money, how do I get the thing I've been looking for? I'm saying that as, hi, my name's Don. I was scrolling through online this week looking at stuff that I would like to buy because I've been wanting that, right? How am I serving people into God's purposes and desires for His plan? Is my life ordered around my own wants, desires, and protection? Or is my life ordered around the protection God wants, the desires He has, and the protection He wants for His people? Stewardship isn't just a good plan to help us order our lives. Stewardship is the necessary discipline for aligning the entirety of our lives into and towards the fullness of God's plan. If you want to see what God had planned for your block or your building or your neighborhood or your church, the reality is stewardship is the way to do that. You look at the giftedness you've been given, the talent you have, the experience you come from. You look at what you're able to do and you figure out, God, here's all this. How do I order all of this so that what you want to happen, happens? For some of us, stewardship is tough because it requires us to release control in our plans, and a lot of us just aren't good at it. Stewardship is our fullness, is our faithfulness, reacting to God's faithfulness. It's when we've seen God work in our own lives. We've seen where we could have been. We've seen what we could have been doing. We see where our lives were heading, and we see how God was faithful to us when we weren't faithful to Him. Stewardship is what it looks like when we become faithful back. Likely, we all agree that a life of stewardship is best, right? You would like to live in a neighborhood where everyone else in your neighborhood were good stewards, making sure that all that was good, right? But we all agree at the same time that we often fail to give what's required to steward our lives well. This isn't just a cute idea for nice people. It's a necessary discipline to love and live like Jesus. Jesus tells this story, and it's not about stewarding individual areas of our life, but ultimately it's the ultimate result of our faithfulness or failure in stewardship. The story goes this way. It's in Matthew chapter 15, verse 14. He says it's going to be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them, right? Some translations say he gathered his servants or his stewards, right? So we're talking about stewardship. And he entrusted his wealth to them. Now that part of the story we all like, right? The guy that just won the $2 billion or whatever the jackpot was is like, hey, I want you to come over. I'm going to give all this to you. I want you to do well with it. And you're like, yeah, all right, right? To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. I always thought that was a weird statement. So some of us just aren't able to handle more because of what we would do with it, right? And it's not just about how much money we get. It's about God giving us what we're able to steward, right? Here's what I know. One, I'm not a lottery ticket buyer, but if I were to ever win, I know God's not going to let me win because I don't know if He can trust me with what I'm going to do with it. You get the image? So each of us, according to our ability, God's given us what we are able to steward. Doesn't mean we always steward it. It just means he's given us what we're able to steward. When he went on, it says, then he went on his journey. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work. Get it? And remember, he's using money, but this isn't about just money. It's about our talents. It's about what God's given you. It's about the experiences you have and how that can help somebody else. This stewardship deal is about you've got square footage in your home that could be used to bless somebody. Are you doing that? It's about you have extra time. Does that go to Netflix and Facebook, or does it give to encouraging somebody and mentoring somebody? And so in all of this, to some he was given this, he puts that time to work. He puts that money to work. Well, I'm really tired at the end of the week. It's like, well, you still have some energy. This guy put that energy to work and the strength to work. He's putting it to work, and he gained 5 bags more. So he doubled his investment. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more, but the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned, settled his accounts with him. The one who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. I'm bringing 10 back. And his master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things, and I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. Look, now I've got 4. And the man with 2 bags of gold, his master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You'll hear it. It's like copy and paste here. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I know you're a hard man. Harvesting where you've not sown, gathering where you've not scattered seed, right? This dude's a little frustrated with God and trying to defend himself. So he says, God, listen, I know you take stuff that you didn't do, right? That was some other dude's work, and you're trying to get our tithe money for X, Y, and Z, right? I know that you're gathering where I know you didn't like do the hard work over here like we did, and I know you're trying to get that money back. You get the separation in thoughts here? So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here's what belongs to you, right? I didn't steal it. I didn't mess with it. I just didn't do anything with it. His excuse for disobedience is to attack God's character. His master replied, you wicked and lazy servant, so you knew that I harvest where I'm not. This is where I think God gets a little sassy, all right? I think this is where he's throwing a little something on it to make it stand out, right? Oh, so you knew where, right? That's how I'm reading it. That I harvest where I've not sown, and oh, so you know that I've gathered where I haven't scattered seed. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so when I return, I would have at least received it back with some interest. So take the bag of gold from him, give it to the one who has 10 bags, because whoever has been given more, they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And you're like, so God just offed this dude because he dug a hole and put his money in it. Here's what I want us to get the image of. This isn't like Jesus just going crazy. The image is you've got a job, you have a role, you're here for a purpose, and you didn't do what you were asked to do. Right? And if our life is built to be, how do we do more? How do we make more? How do we reach more? How do we encourage more? How do we build up more? How do we love more? How do we give away more? And all we're doing is like, well, I'm just going to sit here at my kitchen table and just hope the world gets better. You know, I'm not going to do anything, but like I just hope it happens. Right? I've got all this experience, but I'm still working through some of that. There's a way that, man, I see stuff in people, but I'm not going to tell them that because that could be awkward. Right? Man, I've been looking at the guy across from church thinking, oh, we should hang out. But then it's like 4 months later, it's like, I don't know, I'm busy, so we just haven't. And all of a sudden, we start realizing how easy it is to become the dude that takes everything God's given him, bury a hole, stick it in there, because we just don't, we're busy. We don't have time. It's hard to come up with how we do that. Well, I'm just tired a lot, or, like with the kids, how are we going to make this happen, right? And you may not be burying your stuff in a hole. You may just be burying yourself in your apartment or your house, doing nothing with any of you that God's given you to do anything for anybody that's them. What I want us to look at as we close out our time is just 3 things about this life of stewardship. The first one is this. Unfaithfulness in stewardship is disobedient and it's distant from the blessing of God. It's not just, right, this dude that dug it. It's like, hey, I didn't steal. It's not like I took your stuff, right? I just didn't do anything. In the words of Scripture, I didn't put any of it to work. That's the issue. I held on to it. I kept it. It's mine. It's just not yours. So here's your stuff back because I know, God, I know how you are, right? So here we go. The very act of stewardship is becoming a servant. So we are all stewarding our resources and relationship. The question is, what master are we serving as we go? You get it? All of us are stewarding. We're all serving something or someone. The question is, who or what, right? Are we serving ourselves? Are we serving our ideas? Are we serving our cultural ideas? Are we serving others, right? You can live a life of people-pleasing where you will die serving other people just because you want to make everybody happy. Are we just serving money and the promises that it gives and the power that it gives? Our options aren't give money or don't give money. The option we're giving is faithfulness or disobedience. The question for us isn't, it's not, well, I'm really busy or I can be available. The question is, will you be faithful or will you be disobedient? The question isn't, do you have time and energy and strength? The question is, right, am I faithful or am I being disobedient? Stewardship is our way of obeying and drawing near to God. It's not an option for Jesus followers. This isn't one of those like, I don't really want to do that one. If you don't do this one, the rest of it kind of falls apart. Disobedience isn't fully understood by right and wrong. Right? It's like, well, I didn't have like people over my house for 6 months, but it's not like I shot a dude. Right? It's not like I robbed a bank. It's not like right? It's not that bad. But the reality is, when we talk about this, it's not necessarily always about, did I do the right thing or did I do the wrong thing? Often, let's think about it this way, when we're disobedient, it's more about pulling our lives further away from God or drawing closer. Is what I'm doing more like who Jesus is, or is it less like who Jesus is? Was Jesus too tired? Was he too busy? Right? Remember the feeding of 5,000? Like, hey, we got like a couple, it's like a, sharks take home thing. Like, we got some fish and loaves. I don't know what to do with this. Right? And Jesus is like, well, that's just not enough. We don't have enough to help people. So you guys eat, but they're going to have to figure it out. No. Jesus is figuring out a way. How do we use what we've got to bless the people that are around us? Disciples of Jesus who aren't stewarding our lives are unfaithful to our calling, disobedient to God's word, and we live distance from the presence of God. Now there's the downer. Now we'll go uphill, all right? The second one is this. Stewardship aligns my life to God's plans and God's purposes. You want to know what it feels like to be in the center of God's will? You look at everything you've got and say, God, here it is. What do we do with this? Right? I'm not making my budget. God, I want you to help me make my budget. I'm not figuring out my calendar and when we've got time. God, show me where I've got margins of space that are being used for dumb stuff that I can start doing your will with. God, show me, why am I so exhausted? And how do I fix that so I can do the things you've called me to do? The very act of stewardship is becoming a servant. We get to come alongside God's work and be under God's lordship. The author and perfecter of our faith, the creator and sustainer of the world, the one who never began, the one who will never end. That's who we align our lives to when we give ourselves to steward our resources and our relationships to the kingdom. Of all the people, powers, and issues we could serve, the living God is probably the best use of your time. In the parable, these servants are invited to care for the master's things towards the master's plans using the resources given by the master. God isn't asking you to sit on the sideline and be a better person until you die or Jesus comes back. God is asking you to take everything that he's given you to join him in working in his world towards his purposes. In our time with God, are we intentionally paying attention and watching for the following? Are we asking God things like this? God, where are you at work around me, and who are you at work within near me? Right? God, are you shaking somebody's life up that nobody really knows about? But if you could draw me to them, I know that you're already, like they're crying themselves to sleep, praying and asking you for stuff at night, and nobody else knows it but you. Would you help me know that I need to go start loving on this person? Would you show me that I need to invite this person in? Would you lead me to the people? Would you open up the doors of our house so that this would be a safe place for them to come in? Right? If the stewards in Jesus' parable hadn't watched their master work, they wouldn't have known what was expected. Because he didn't give a lot of instructions. But they got his money and they just knew what they were supposed to do because they watched what he was doing. Right? Number two, what have you given, right? This is prayer stuff. God, what have you given me that can be used to serve and guard that person, people, or place? God, who here needs me to give what I've got to help and watch over them? The stewards in the parable only used what God had given them. You get it? God didn't say, you need a bunch more stuff. Here's a starter package, but you go get the rest of it. What God said is, all I care about is what you do with this. Right? Meaning, everything you have in your life right now is everything you need to do everything God's asked you to do. You don't need extra stuff. You're not waiting on supplies. You're not holding up until something actually happens. You've got all of it. So what's going on? Right? The third prayer is this: keep me attentive, right? Help me pay attention as I get to work, giving what you've given me to serve and guard your purposes around me. It's a different prayer than like, God, I'm not moving until you show me what I'm supposed to do. It says the stewards in the parable, they got to work immediately. They weren't like, oh man, we better just sit around and just, let's wait. And then 5 years later, they're like, we're just waiting. I don't know, right? It's the like, I don't know exactly what it is, but I kind of know generally what we're supposed to do. Let's just get going until the good stuff starts popping up. You get the image? The servant got to work immediately. Sometimes waiting is a spiritual practice, and sometimes it's disobedience. The disciples of Jesus, by definition, are people ordering our entire life to Jesus' ways and to his words. So stewardship is a natural response of being a disciple of Jesus. And the last one is this: a life of faithful stewardship leads us to where God has prepared for us. Right? This will put your life on a path that heads directly towards God. God is at the end of where he plans to take everybody. Don't forget, from Genesis to Revelation, the big overarching picture, spoiler alert if you've not read the book, right? The big overarching picture is, how do I get people back to me? Right? He's already loved us. How do we love him back? How do we get people to see who he is and understand who he is so that they love who he is, so they walk towards him and end up towards him, so that eternity's spent with him? So this life of stewardship is going to lead us wherever God has prepared for us. Begin with the end in mind. How are we living now depends on what question we're asking. Is the question, what do I want for me now? Because that results in me using God's resources and people for my purposes. Or is the question, what response do you want from God? How do I want to live so that I get the response I'm hoping God will give? Results in me giving myself to serve God's people with his resources. The two responses in the parable are this. Remember? You wicked and lazy servant. Just so you know, when you meet God, that's not like the first line you want to be said. Right? Take the bag of gold from him. Right? And he goes through this whole thing. That's not what we want to be said of us. This seems intense for a guy who just put his money into an in-ground savings account. Right? But remember, it's about the fact that he did nothing for anyone with everything that he was given. The second response that was given is, well done, good and faithful steward or servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. God flips this order up on its head. If you want more, give more. If you want more energy, give more energy. If you want more ministry, give away more ministry. If you want to see more good, give away more good. Right? If you look around your life and you're like, man, I don't have very many good friends, you better become a really good friend, because then God will give you good friends. You get the image? It's this piece of, how do I take what I've been given and give it away first? Right? Jesus died first. The invitation happened first. God's moving first. The response then is on our end. Everything we do with everything we have for everything around us is aimed at which response from God we want to hear. And not about doing it for a response, right? Because we've got 4 boys and they know how to ask so that they get what they want. And they know who to ask. Because if they ask me if they can have some candy, I'm thinking, sure, as long as you bring me a piece. Right? If they ask mom's like, no, it's close to bedtime and your teeth are going to rot and all this stuff. So they're like, well, let's skip her. He seems to be the guy that's cool with this, right? And so they know who to ask. They know how to ask because they want the response they want. But that's not the issue here. What we want is we want to live faithfully in a way that elicits the response that we're hoping for. We want to live the kind of lives so that when God looks at us, he says, that's a good and faithful servant that's doing it well. God is constantly drawing us to himself, drawing us near to God, and he will draw near to you. Every act of obedience, every part of our old self we take off, we draw near to God. So if we're student followers of Jesus, if we are disciples, our soul desires to be where he is, then we're going to be with him. So we'll do the things that it takes to live like who he is and do what he does so that when people see us, they see him. If we aren't aligning our lives to God and his plan, then what are we aligning our lives to? Where is that going? And how's it going for you? And where will we end up if we keep going that way? Matthew chapter 7:13, Jesus says, "For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it." Here's how I want us to think about that. If we don't know where we're going, it's likely we're not going down the right path. If we're not intentional with where our time and our money, or our time and our energy and our money, our strength, if we have no idea where that stuff's going, my guess is we're probably on that wide road that's really easy. Because it takes a lot of intentionality to do something hard, right? Jesus says this way in verse 14, "But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." Why? Because you got to be looking for it. And you have to order your life for it. And you have to think about it. And you've got to change stuff for it. And you have to make sure that you're going where you want to go so you end up where you like to be. If you're looking for life, then you look to Jesus, the way, the truth, and the life. He's the only way that any of us can get to God. And as we follow that, there's a lot of things that flow in. But today we're talking about stewardship. God, how do I take what you've given me? Not the stuff you haven't given me. Right? Not the house you haven't given me yet. Not the car that I wish ran, or at least ran right. Right? Not the money I wish I had. Not all that stuff. God, how do I take what I actually have? And how do I start figuring out, what do you want to use this for? Right? Spoiler alert, he wants you to have a house so you'll be able to pay for the things that you need. Right? He just may not want you to have the $3 million house you really want. So if you start using what you've got, he'll end up taking you where you need to go. You will steward your life towards whatever's leading it. Right? You'll steward your life towards whatever's leading it. So the good question is, where's all my life heading towards? Is it heading just towards you getting what you want? And the question then becomes, well, how's that going for you? Right? And if you think you're doing great, ask the people closest to you, how's that going for them? What are they getting out of you as you just try to help yourself, please yourself, and take care of yourself? You get it? There's no better leader for your life than Jesus. And so as we close, what I want to lead us into is just a time of prayer. And so we'll do that, and I'll dismiss us. Here's where I feel like God's leading us in all this. It's a question. It's an image meant to give a response, right? This parable of these stewards, these people that God had given much, and some of them gave some of them gave nothing, that kind of deal, is for us. Where is the rest of your life going? What are you currently doing to put it where you want it to be? And is Jesus a part of any of that? What I know about this church, because I know at least a good handful of your people that are here stewarding this body and helping steward this community through the life of New Life, is you coming close to Christ and not having to do it by yourself is central to the mission of what New Life is. It's to be this family of love, right? Where you're not out here doing it on your own, figuring out on your own, trying to build it on your own for your own, right? You get a group of people, most of which are in this room, who want to walk with you as you figure that out. So, right, family love that cooperates with God so that you can become these fully devoted, fruitful followers of Jesus, so that when your life is aimed towards Jesus, your life is a life of blessing, it's a life of benefit. People around you, their lives get better because you're in it, because Jesus is in you. All right? Let's stand and pray.